There we go. So I'd just like to welcome everyone to the CMSM, our Tea Time Talk. So this is an initiative that we're starting. So we're getting wonderful historians like James coming on to talk about events in history that connect with some of the amazing stories that we have in our museum. So my name's Ashley Percival-Borley. I'm one of the trustees, and this particular topic is quite close to my heart. So I thought I would host this particular talk. So I'm very, very pleased that James allowed me to do this. James himself, he is a PhD candidate at the University of Essex, and his dissertation is going to be on the role and memory of RAF Bomber Commander in the Battle of Britain. He does a lot of work on British cultural memory of aerial warfare from the First World War to the present day. He does a lot of talks for places like History Indoors and World War II TV. And gosh, you've just done a recent talk, haven't you, James, with RAF Hendon, was it? Or
yeah, I was at the RAF Museum conference middle of the week, and I've got another talk coming up in December. Again, Bomber Command Battle of Britain. So,
which is fantastic. So we are so lucky that you've come to give us this talk. I think it's so relevant. I think it's something that I've certainly grown up remembering the fantastic Battle of Britain film, and then my dad was in the Royal Air Force, so definitely part of my identity and part of the history that I love to study as well. So thank you so much for coming on, James. So I'm going to hand over to you. People who are watching, thanks so much for coming to our Tea Time Talk. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat, and at the end of the talk, I will do the questions with James then. So over to you, James.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about the Battle of Britain. I just think it's a fascinating period of history, and it's one that's embedded in British culture and understanding and national identity. So yeah, I'd like to share a few of my thoughts and insights and such like, because this is what I'm researching. And as Ash said, please throw in your questions. I'll be happy to answer and discuss things. So let's begin with, what was the Battle of Britain? Well, I'm going to start with Britain going to war in 1939. You have efforts before the war to maintain peace, to keep peace, this policy of appeasement, which doesn't work out. I mean, you've got to think about what happened 20 years before the First World War. We don't want a repeat of that. We don't want trenches. We don't want Somme. We don't want Passchendaele. We want peace. We want Europe to work, really, but it doesn't. And the final straw is when Nazi troops invade Poland, and Britain and France declare war on Germany, and the Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announces this to the nation. Neville is on the left there, and it's an incredible speech, actually, especially when you look at it in detail. It talks about the long struggles to maintain peace, and sadly we are going to have to go to war, and then follows this period that's known as the phony war, which I'm not a fan of that title. It's a phony war for British French troops in France, because that's where they are expecting an invasion, but certainly for the Navy, it's not a phony war. You have battles. I mean, you got the film The Battle of the River Plate, which is a great example of these naval battles. You have the sinking of the Royal Oak in Scapa Flow with a U-boat that comes in and sinks it. Again, you get the trade lines, etc., over the Atlantic, and the Battle of the Atlantic starts from day one, but also the war in the air starts from day one. So the RAF goes to war, and the hope is that the war is going to be dictated by the air, and there is this theory of what's called a knockout blow. So there is a buildup of a bomber force, and there's a lot of pre-war narrative and literature and films that suggest actually there won't be trenches, you won't need soldiers on the ground. Aircraft are going to come in and potentially decide the wars on themselves. So there is this build-up of a bomber force, and there is this huge doctrine within the RAF of a strategic bombing campaign. There's also a build-up of a defensive countermeasure. So you do get huge advancements in aircraft technology. And I mean, you look at aircraft there, so you've got a Wellington bomber there on the left, or quite a few Wellington bombers actually, which was partly designed by Barnes Wallis, who later went on to infamously design the bouncing bomber, the Dam Busters raids. You look at it and you think, gosh, that looks old fashioned, doesn't it? That doesn't look like it really is going to be much of a danger at all. But the pace of technology is so quickly that I think in 1937 actually you have dual seat biplanes, which are frontline bombers in the Royal Air Force. Then you've got these, and then another 2 years down the line you've got Lancasters, and then so the technology is developing at a very, very quick pace. And then the top right you've got these Hawker Hurricanes. There's a contingent of the Royal Air Force that is sent to France. They're expecting this invasion by Nazi Germany into France, so they're preparing themselves, and that happens over the winter. There's also a call for the nation to mobilize, and I just want to add the importance of women here. So you've got the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, a poster in the middle, who play an important part. And I think one of the themes I want to talk about here is how we can have this perception that it's all about the air crew, it's all about the fighter pilots. Actually, there was a whole team backing them up, supporting them, and the Women's Auxiliary Air Force do incredible things in the battle. So they're on the front line, they're part of intelligence. When it comes to radar detecting aircraft, they're usually the ones plotting on these huge maps. I will go into detail about this later. Of course, they're used to, their roles include ferrying bombs via tractors to the bomber aircraft. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And you get there's incredible acts of bravery as well involving the Women's Auxiliary Air Force during the battle. And of course, you've then got the call for, I've got the poster there, come into the factories. This is about a people's war, and that's bounded around quite a lot at the time as well, about people uniting and coming together. So let's talk a little bit about the RAF structure. Now, there are various commands in the Royal Air Force. I'm going to talk about the three main commands. You have training command, etc. But essentially, you've got bomber command, fighter command, and coastal command. So you've got RAF Bomber Command, which is divided into groups with a map there drawn by yours truly. So do forgive the nature of this map and this attempt. At the time of the Battle of Britain, they're led by Charles Portal, who you can see pictured there. As I say, they're divided into various groups, and generally the different groups have different aircraft. So 2 group have Bristol Blenheims, for example. 5 group have Hamdens. I'll talk a little bit about these aircraft in a minute. In the middle, you've got Fighter Command, which is led by Hugh Dowding, which you can see pictured there. And Hugh Dowding, incredible visionary when it comes to defense. So he comes up with this system that is named after him called the Dowding system. And essentially you can see the red lines there going out towards France. And the other ones, the dotted lines, these are the radar or RDF, radar direction finding, that is developed. And Dowding comes up with this system to utilize this radar system to detect the inbound enemy aircraft, dilute that information, what's important, so that it gets eventually to the fighter squadrons and the right ones are scrambled. And the wonderful thing about this system is, so generally you have an operations room with a huge map of Britain with these plots showing where everything is. Now you've got people talking to each other all over the country to make sure that information is up to date. It's an incredible system. On top of that, you've got the breakup with anti-aircraft defenses, etc. And you can see on that middle map that Fighter Command itself is divided into groups. You've got 13 group in the north, 12 group in the middle, 10 group to the west. 11 group is going to face most of the Luftwaffe onslaught in the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe being the name of the German Air Force. And obviously the RAF are going to play a huge, important part in any form of defense. Dowding's thinking ahead. Now, there's some historians that say actually that maybe he was too defensive. Maybe, you know, the fact that so there's infamously when the Battle of France happens and France is about to fall, he refuses to send fighters over, and actually is very reluctant to send aircraft over full stop into France. The RAF is stretched. It is having an expansion plan, but it is quite stretched. And Dowding is very aware of this. So he's very reluctant to send these fighters, you know, to places that he thinks that there might be heavy losses. Very, very, very much in his mind that these fighters need to defend Britain. And this happens in 1940. Some people said that's a detriment. Maybe aircraft could have been sent over and it made the difference. I don't really think so. I think that Dowding made the right call. But we'll go into that a little bit in a minute. You've then got RAF Coastal Command, who, again, are really kind of forgotten about in the war in general, and especially in the Battle of Britain, but they perform incredibly important things. So, for example, it's Coastal Command aircraft that patrol the enemy coast and find the invasion barges and the assembly of German forces for a potential invasion of England, of Britain. They also sink U-boats and assist the Royal Navy in keeping command of the sea. They're very, very important, generally flying with fairly obsolete aircraft as well. But they're divided into a group system as well, which you can see is covering various seas and around Britain. So that was the RAF structure. Let's talk about the Luftwaffe. So the Luftwaffe are essentially led by, they are led by Hermann Goering, who you can see pictured in the middle. Hermann Goering is quite a character, to put it mildly. He's flamboyant, he's bold, he was a First World War fighter ace, actually fought with, many of you have probably heard of the Red Baron, Baron von Richthofen, and he was a part of that squadron. A fighter ace, decorated, a hero within Germany. He joins the Nazi party in the 1920s. I can't remember exactly when, and he comes to power. He ends up being in charge of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. Now, Luftwaffe are divided into, for the sake of the Battle of Britain, 3 groups that are going to be launched. So you can see the map on the left. You've got, the fleets are called Luftflottes. So you've got Luftflotte 5 in the north, which is coming mainly from Scandinavia. You've got Luftwaffe 2, which mainly has the short-range fighters, and they're flying, a lot of them, as you can see, the air bases near the Pas de Calais. That's where a lot of the Luftwaffe is going to be coming over, especially on those raids on the 11 group airfields. You've then got Luftflotte 3, which is coming, as you can see, kind of from Normandy towards the English coast. But most of it's going to be coming from Luftwaffe 2. And this is, of course, the plan to knock out the Royal Air Force and launch Operation Sea Lion. And I highlight some of the documents that are at the Combined Military Services Museum relating to the invasion of England, which you can see there on the right. There are questions over the legitimacy, over the strength of the Royal Navy and such like, but this is a very, very real threat at the time. And it's taken very seriously, as you can imagine, by the Royal Air Force, by Britain. But that's essentially the brief for the Luftwaffe and for Goering is knock the Royal Air Force out of the sky. You know, the British Army's taken a battering at Dunkirk, retreating from the Battle of France, and the Royal Air Force is what stands in the way. You get rid of the Royal Air Force, the Navy are going to be at the mercy of the aircraft, etc. That's the theory anyway. So it's all about air supremacy. That is the key thing about the Battle of Britain. And for the RAF, it's about still demonstrating it's a force to be reckoned with, that it controls the skies over England and actually over Northwest Europe as well. So let's talk about some of the aircraft. These aren't all the aircraft. Obviously, there's quite a lot to go through. So I'm just going to talk about key ones that I'm going to mention in the talk. So on the left, I'm sure many of you recognize the Supermarine Spitfire, designed by J. Mitchell. It comes from designs in the 1920s, 30s of seaplanes in races called the Schneider Trophy that break speed records. And it's very unusual. It's stressed skin metal. It's got these incredible elliptical wings. It's actually a bit of a nightmare to manufacture at the start, and there are questions over that. So, and as a consequence, it's not in great numbers in the Royal Air Force at this time, at the Butler at a crucial time. But it's fast, it's incredibly maneuverable, and held in high regard. And I'll probably say it's the poster aircraft of the Battle of Britain. You get Spitfire funds, you get this mythology linked to the Spitfire out of the Battle of Britain and onwards. And I should add again, at the museum, there are parts of a Mark I Spitfire you can see on display. So yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. The main fighter of the RAF, which you will see on the top right corner, is the Hawker Hurricane, which you can see looks different to the Spitfire, especially when you look at the canopy, the way it's designed. It's not bubbled, it's straight, and there are these metal lines going through. I don't know what the technical term is. The tail fin's larger. It's more conventional in the sense of, as I say, the technology has developed so quickly, developing from biplanes to monoplanes. The Hurricane is a little bit of a middle ground. So a lot of it is dope fabric, which comes from Ireland, and it is stretched over the airframe. So it's not all metal like the Spitfire. It's got a stable gun platform, whereas you can see the Spitfire. So the sort of red squares are where the guns are on these aircraft, and you can see with the Hurricane that they're concentrated. But this is a key thing, actually, because when you get concentrated machine gun fire, it means it packs more of a punch, and there's more chance to actually converge those guns onto a target, which is in the Hurricane's advantage. It's a little bit slower than the Spitfire, but again, it's held in high regard. And a key factor, as I say, is it's very easy to maintain, to repair, because it fits into that transition period of biplane to monoplane. The industry is set up to support the Hurricane. And actually, in the course of the Battle of Britain, 2/3 of enemy aircraft were shot down by Hurricanes. It's an incredible aircraft for the Battle of Britain. It's soon out of date, but we're talking about 1940. It is key. It is very important. Bottom left, you've got a bomber called the Handy Page Hamden. It handles a little bit like a fighter. So the pilot is sat there at the front, you can see. And it's used mainly for low-level flying. It's used for anti-shipping. It's used for mine laying, which they call gardening. It's given that nickname, gardening. And it's held in high regard. And I will be talking a little bit about the Hamden and some of the missions that it took part in shortly. The next aircraft I want to talk about is the Bristol Blenheim, which is in the bottom right. When it came out, it was designed as a bomber. It was faster than the RAF fighters that were in service. It's an incredible aircraft. Again, the rate of technology means that by 1940, it was superseded in terms of better performing aircraft, fighters that could easily match it. But it's a massive workforce of Bomber Command, and it's two group who generally fly this aircraft. And to be honest, it's still a mainstay in the RAF, even into 1941. And it isn't until you get really the Mosquito, perhaps the Boston that comes in 42, that it's replaced. But it is a massive workhorse of Bomber Command, and it's definitely worth mentioning. And I will be talking about Blenheims as this talk develops. So let's talk about the Luftwaffe. The main fighter is the Messerschmitt 109, which you can see on the top left, with the bright yellow nose and wingtips and tail. This is an incredible aircraft. It can dive, it's fast, it's a match for the Spitfire, it's a match for the Hurricane, held in high regard. It's got a hell of a punch on it with cannons. So where the Spitfire and Hurricane are armed with 303 machine guns, the 109 is armed with cannons and machine guns, and the cannons are huge, especially in comparison to the 303 rounds, and they explode on impact as well. So it carries one hell of a punch. Incredible aircraft. Sustainability, well, it's difficult to fly. Again, it's all stressed metal, so it's very, very modern fighter. Down point, limited range. So at this stage, there isn't this mindset in any nation to have a long-range fighter. Fighters are seen as generally defensive. It's all about the bomber. It's all about the bomber getting through. And it's not really until much later you get these longer range aircraft. But that's the 109. That's the main adversary that the RAF is going to be battling with. On the right, top right, you've got a Heinkel 111. This is a mainstay of the Luftwaffe bombers. It's an interesting aircraft. It is armed with cannons, so it is heavily defended. Doesn't have a great bomb load, but yeah, it's going to be the main bomber really of the Battle of Britain. Bottom left, you've got the sort of gull-winged Junkers 87, which is called a Stuka. Now, this has been used in the Battle of France as a tactical bomber, which has supported the Wehrmacht and the ground forces to devastating effect. And it's got a siren which wails, it makes a horrible, horrible sound, which again is a weapon in itself, really. But it's slow. It's not very well armed, and when it comes up against the Royal Air Force, it's shot down in droves. It's really, really struggling. But it is important, especially when the Nazi forces invaded Poland and France and the Low Countries. On the bottom right, you've got the Junkers 88. Incredible aircraft, actually. It's fast, it can dive well. It's later used as a night fighter, so its capabilities are very, very impressive, what it can do. Again, not really a great bomb load, but it can defend itself. It's a very useful aircraft, and it is used by the Luftwaffe in great numbers during the Battle of Britain. So I've mentioned this idea of the bomber, and the doctrine is all about the bomber, really, in most nations. And Stanley Baldwin, Prime Minister, you can see on the left there, in 1932, said in the House of Commons that the bomber will always get through. And that is the idea, that it will get through and it will absolutely cause chaos and wars will be over quite quickly. Doesn't happen. So the RAF go into battle with their bomber force and they're found wanting. They are shot down in droves. So initially they're attacking ports. So Wilhelmshaven is one, Wellingtons and Blenheims, and they are shot to bits. The fighters go after them. They're lightly armed. And there is this real feeling of, oh, this isn't really going to be a good plan. So most of the RAF bombers end up flying at night as a consequence from about December 1939. This is another thing about the phony war, as I mentioned. It really wasn't for Bomber Command. So the first aircraft for Bomber Command takes off, I think, 3 minutes or so after Neville Chamberlain's speech declaring war. And from then on, Bomber Command's war lasts. It goes on and on and on until 1945. Just again, highlighting a couple of artifacts from the museum in the middle there. You've got some of the flying gear that's worn by aircrew. The bright yellow is a life jacket, which was dubbed a Mae West after the actress. You generally, I mean, you're flying at temperatures that are incredibly cold, and especially in the early bombers, there was no sense of heating. So later on, you get electrically heated suits and such like. But this stage of the war, you don't have that. So you're wearing your sheepskin flying jackets, etc., which you can see there, and you've got the helmets as well that they wear. You can see the mask at the front, which would act as an oxygen mask and also act as a means to communicate, so it would have a radio link to other crew members, etc., and goggles as well. And you get these leather gloves and leather boots. A presiding thing is fire. So these aircraft generally, especially at the start of the war, they don't have they're not self-sealed fuel tanks. So these aircraft would really light up and catch fire. And there is a fear. I mean, this is a fear that goes back to the First World War as well, where aircraft catch fire. This is why you've got all of this equipment to protect you, and you get some incredibly horrible injuries from burning. So much so that you end up having specialized hospitals and such like. And the burn victims call themselves the Guinea Pig Club, which they actually establish. And actually, it develops into forms of plastic surgery, which are very innovative going forward and for helping with these horrific injuries. But that's a good example, actually, you're seeing there of the flying outfit that very often these pilots would wear. In the Battle of Britain, sometimes it wasn't always practical to wear all of this, and it was a hot summer very often, so you had people going up in just a Mae West life jacket and shirt sleeves, which isn't ideal, especially if the aircraft catches fire. But needs must, and that's how it was sometimes. So I mentioned the fall of France. I just want to go over that very quickly. The idea for the Allies really is about keeping Germany at bay. They're expecting this offensive in the West that happens on the 10th of May, 1940, initially through the Low Countries, so through the Netherlands and Belgium. British and French forces advance, but the Nazi forces advance through the Ardennes forest and essentially cut the forces in two with a method of warfare called Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war in German. There's nothing really especially innovative about Blitzkrieg. On the grand scale of things, it's a very rooted in Prussian warfare. Germany needs a quick war, so this is about sending troops forward. This is about lightning attack. The things that are innovative are using aircraft like the Stuka that I mentioned and using radio communication to talk to the ground and air. And having this more modern sense of tactical warfare, which is developed in the First World War, but the Allies seem to have forgotten it. The French build a defense called the Maginot Line, which is on the immediate French and German border, which the Germans pretty much just go around. But there we go. And the forces are pushed back. There are counterattacks, but large proportion of British troops, as well as French, are evacuated from Dunkirk. And France surrenders roughly about 6 weeks. This battle lasts. It's a huge shock. It's a huge, huge shock. France is meant to hold out. You look at the First World War, you look at Verdun, you look at what happened. That's a whole different talking about what happened there with France and the mentality and what failed at a tactical strategic level. But that's it. And Britain now doesn't have the French ally, which was going to be so the plan was to have France as generally having most of the army. Britain was going to be the Air Force and Navy. So now it's not looking too wonderful. But on the 10th of May, the day that this attack starts, you get a new prime minister. So Neville Chamberlain is replaced by Winston Churchill. You can see on the right. He comes in and is a very, very different to Neville Chamberlain. He's flamboyant, he's bombastic, he's energetic. Chamberlain essentially resigns because Nazi Germany invades Denmark and Norway. British and French troops are sent, and it's a complete failure. And Neville Chamberlain faces a lot of criticism over this, and that's partly why he goes. And Churchill comes in. Breath of fresh air, breath of new energy, and really starts shaking things up. But France does surrender. France falls. The RAF play a part, of course, in the Battle of France. The bombers, the light bombers, especially Blenheims and an aircraft called the Ferry Battle, are engaged to try and stop the German forces, but they are shot down in droves. And as I said earlier about Hugh Dowding, he refuses to send more fighters to France, and the game is up, and really it's about preservation. It's about this oncoming battle with the Battle of Britain. But that's essentially that. So we then get to a stage really where we go, Britain is alone against Nazi Germany, which just isn't true. I'm sorry. It's alone in the sense that it doesn't have France anymore, and there are huge factors without having an army, etc. And you got an image there from, I think it's Punch magazine, of a British soldier waving his fist at the oncoming Luftwaffe aircraft, very well alone. And this idea embeds itself in popular culture. But Britain was not alone. I mean, for example, the 11th of September, 1939, Canada declares war on Germany. You then have Australia, you have the rest of the empire, the Commonwealth coming in. And you've got this great image there of a poster together. But you can see the different people or parts of the empire and Commonwealth coming together. And this is a huge thing. But on top of this, you then have free forces, what are dubbed free forces, from countries that have been occupied by Nazi Germany. And the left image there of the airmen walking away from Orca Hurricane, they're Polish pilots who play an incredible role in the Battle of Britain, incredibly brave, and actually our 303 squadron is the most successful squadron of the Battle of Britain, and they came in late as well because of various bureaucratic things that were going on. But they perform an incredible job. I would strongly say that if anyone was alone, it was pretty much Germany. It had Italy that really couldn't contribute much. But it needed to win a quick war, and it was still a very strong opponent, and things could have gone very bad very quickly if it hadn't been played well. So what are the stages of the Battle of Britain? So the initial one is called the Kanalkampf, which is essentially the Channel War. This is where the Luftwaffe go, okay, Iron Nation. So there's two mentalities here that you can have with the Battle of Britain, or the way that the Luftwaffe can approach the Battle of Britain. You can go for a siege. You cut off Britain, you deny its sea lanes, you bomb its ports, you know, the lifelines, or you can go out for an all-out assault on the RAF, on the defences. And initially, it's kind of going towards the siege idea of things. So the Luftwaffe start attacking shipping, they start attacking ports. This isn't what's portrayed in the British press, rather interestingly. So you've got a newspaper there from the Daily Sketch, Battle of Britain, RAF on the offensive. That's not something you think of, but this is because the RAF bombers were on the offensive. They are wanting to take the war to Nazi Germany. This isn't about sitting back on the defense. This is a narrative that's evolved over the years. Now, the Kanalkampf lasts for a number of weeks. It starts really in July. I should add that Bomber Command have been at war against the Luftwaffe as part of the Battle of Britain since June, attacking Luftwaffe airfields. But this stage of the battle develops, it goes ahead. The Dowding system comes into its own here, and the image in the middle at the bottom is of RDF chain home. So it's called chain home, the radar installations. You've also got chain home low, which looks at, rather self-explanatory, aircraft that are flying at low level. This is all part of the system. And one of the major factors as well with this is if you don't have this early warning system, the way that it works, you're going to have aircraft on standing patrol. You have aircraft on standing patrol, they could be outnumbered, they're using up fuel, and it's just not practical. So the Dowding system, the use of radar, is crucial. What's especially important and key to realize here is the Luftwaffe don't appreciate this. They do not understand how important the RDF and the Dowding system is to the Royal Air Force. So they attack on the 12th of August, the RDF station, and they never really bother again, which is completely the wrong strategy. But you've had this Kanalkampf, and this happens until sort of mid-August. I think it wraps up sort of like the 11th, 12th, when it goes to a new phase. When the Luftwaffe attack RAF airfields, and I say RAF airfields, it wasn't just fighter command. Bomber stations, coast command stations were targeted as well. This is a concerted effort against the whole of the Royal Air Force. Now, the RAF is very well prepared for this, part of the Dowding system, but also how its airfields run and how they're structured. A lot of the airfields are grass runways, so they're able to be repaired by the ground forces. And there is a shout out to the incredible ground forces that supported the Royal Air Force in terms of the airmen, etc. You've got an image there, bottom left, of a Spitfire being rearmed by the ground forces, by the ground personnel. Hugely important, and there would be firm relationships established between the ground force. So there would be assigned specific aircraft, and they would speak to the pilot and communicate about what's been done, etc., what needs to be done. You have things on the airfield, such as blast pens, which you can see on the top right. You can see a Spitfire, which is kind of protected by these shallow walls. So other than a direct hit by a bomb, yeah, anything nearby that explodes is generally protected and stopped by these blast pens, and they're spaced around the airfield. Didn't have that in the Battle of France. In the Battle of France, the aircraft were generally lined up in little nice, neat little rows that the Luftwaffe could spot and drop their bombs over. Battle of Britain, you've got a different integrated system, and this is another crucial factor in why the RAF was successful. You've also got a Victoria Cross, which is awarded to James Nicholson. You can see an image of him in the middle, at the bottom. He is in a fight with aircraft, with the Luftwaffe aircraft, and he is shot. His aircraft catches fire, but he decides to fly on and shoot down this Messerschmitt 110 fighter. Before bailing out, when he bails out, he is burnt. He's shot at by troops from the ground who think that he might be a Luftwaffe pilot. And as a consequence, he's given the Victoria Cross, which is the highest award of gallantry that service personnel can be given. But we think again of the Battle of Britain as a defensive battle, but actually Bomber Command was attacking Luftwaffe airfields from June up until early September and being an absolute nuisance. The material damage was not hugely impressive. I think a dozen aircraft are destroyed on the ground, but there's about 1,097 sorties that are launched by Bomber Command, usually at low level, usually hit and run. And they're a nuisance. And in my own research, I found accounts by Luftwaffe personnel that are just sick to death of these attacks, these nuisance attacks that come in, keep them up. And it's also that mentality of keeping air superiority, of keeping control over the skies, that the Luftwaffe are thinking, we can't even control the skies over the airfields that we're supposed to be the masters over. How are we possibly going to knock out the RAF? It comes at a heavy price, as you can see there on the bottom left. That there are a crew of a Blenheim bomber, which you can see on the right there flying at low level, that are still buried over there. And this is an important factor of the Battle of Britain that I think is often forgotten and written out, and it's worth mention. It wasn't just about the RAF getting attacked and defending, it was also about it being pragmatic and going forward. The climax of sort comes in what is called the hardest day on the 18th of August, where fighting command stretched, majorly stretched, and it suffers. So 3 major attacks. You can see the stats there. Aircraft loss 68, 600 aircrew. It's an incredibly intense moment. 37 aircraft destroyed on the ground. And it's a testing point. It's really, this is, the 18th of August, an invasion is surely going to be on the horizon anytime soon. Fighter command's being stretched. At this point, it's being tested. And it's not really set in stone what's going to happen. So as I say, this is dubbed the hardest day as a consequence because of that. But then there is a change of tactics. Now, there is some discussion with historians about how deliberate this was, but essentially near the end of August, I think it's the 24th, night of the 24th, someone might correct me on that, there are bombs that are accidentally dropped on London by a Luftwaffe bomber. This isn't the first time that bombs have fallen on London. It isn't the first time that bombs have fallen on England by any means in residential areas. But Churchill goes, this is unacceptable. This is targeting civilians, etc. We need to bomb Berlin. We need to give it back to the Germans, which the RAF do the night after. They bomb Berlin. It's not very accurate. Most of the bombs miss. But Hitler is sent into an absolute rage about this. You've got a picture of him there on the top right looking very angry. Or I think he's looking very angry, and he orders a change of strategy that the German bombers will attack British cities and move away from the RAF airfields. Now, this is a point where the RAF airfields are very stretched, very stressed. I've mentioned the hardest day. This is not the time to change strategy. Actually, you could argue it might work. So this is the part that Bomber Command play in the Battle of Britain. There is arguments that eventually Luftwaffe were always going to bomb cities, possibly, but why make that speech? Why make such a deal out of it? And it's definitely coming out of this change of strategy. Crucial point still, the invasion barges are being assembled in the Channel ports. You can see an image there, second from the left in. I think that's Boulogne, but all the Channel ports are assembling invasion barges. This is a very serious threat. This is invasion is on the and it's publicized as that as well, of the enemy armada about to come over and invade Britain. We've seen the fall of France, which wasn't expected. Britain surely has to be next. But bomber commanders and coastal commanders sending aircraft over to bomb these barges, and they actually destroy about 1 in 10, which, to be fair, I think is fairly impressive over such a short period of a few weeks. I should mention again that the museum has got a uniform of Arthur Harris, who was head of 5 Group during this period. Arthur Harris later would become head of Bomber Command. Some of you might know him as Bomber Harris. And the uniform is incredible to see, but he was in charge of 5 Group, and 5 Group win 2 Victoria Crosses, and I maintain the fact that there were 3 Battle of Britain VCs. The first went to Roderick Leroyd, you can see on the far right. He was part of an attack on the Dortmund-Ems Canal, which was transporting barges from Germany to the Channel ports, and his bomb, he was the last aircraft, for his mine, it was actually a mine, was dropped, delayed the transportation, blocked the transportation of barges from Germany to the Channel ports for 10 days, with some accounts saying actually it was about a month that it was delayed by. He was given the Victoria Cross for that. And the chap there with the guns is called John Hanna, and he won a Victoria Cross on the 15th of September 1940, dubbed Battle of Britain Day. His aircraft was attacking barges. It caught fire. He was ordered to bail out, but he decided to fight the flames and protect his crewmen and pilots. The pilot who was flying was badly burnt in the process, but put the fire out and managed to get the aircraft home, and he was given a Victoria Cross. Absolutely incredible story, and he's still the youngest recipient of the Victoria Cross in the Royal Air Force. He was 18 years old. So as I mentioned, September 15th, Battle of Britain Day. The tactic of the Luftwaffe is to bomb London, bomb British cities, and go into this siege mentality. The climax of this is the 15th, where there is a all-out attack. There are other days. The attack is thwarted by the RAF, and there's incredible scenes in the film Battle of Britain, which many of you might have seen, where this is built up. Some historians will say it was a day like any other. There had been these mass attacks, but the cancellation of Operation Sea Lion happens 2 days later, and I think that's why it fits into the narrative. Also, think about what was happening with the Battle of the Barges and the sinking of these invasion fleets. I think it all plays into a factor. So we commemorate the Battle of Britain on the 15th of September as a consequence. The claims of aircraft shot down, 175, you can see there, is actually about 60. With 30 RAF fighters being shot down. So it's not a huge victory in sense of numbers, but it is very apparent that the Royal Air Force is still a force to be reckoned with. It's still going to take a lot of beating. And this is why the 15th is so synonymous with the Battle of Britain. So just drawing things to a close, and again, please do ask questions. The Battle of Britain was so important. I think we can underplay certain things and we can overplay other things, but at the end of the day, the survival of Britain, the Empire and the Commonwealth, meant that Germany was going to be dragged into a longer war that it couldn't possibly win. It was then a case of building up forces, which led to Operation Overlord, D-Day as we know it, and ultimately led to the defeat of Nazi Germany. You've got the war on the Eastern Front, but Germany, after failing to knock out Britain, is forced to fight on a 2-front war, invading Russia, thinking that's the way it's going to go forward. I know it's bonkers, isn't it? Please read a history book, Adolf. Yeah. But there we go. The RAF, there, remember, this is the RAF's finest moment, and you get Prime Minister Winston Churchill say, never in the field of few in conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The ultimate tribute to the men and women of the Royal Air Force. The RAF then generally goes on to the offensive. So you've got an image there on the bottom right of an Avro Lancaster, which is a world away from the bombers that you have at the start of the war. And this is launched, and I mean, you get things like the Dam Busters raid, etc. Britain's war, you know, is geared very much on this sense of strategic bombing. And again, I just want to highlight the incredible collection that the museum has. I've got an image there. Really doesn't do it justice at all, of the museum. There are uniforms, so you can learn more about what happened after the Battle of Britain, what happened during the Battle of Britain, and the development of technology and such like. But that is essentially it, and I am open to questions if people have them. Thank you.
James, that was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. Oh gosh, so much information. You just brought everything together as well.
I really tried. I did really try.
No, absolutely wonderful. So absolutely from everyone, thank you so much. We do have a question. This is from Neil, and he said, did the Luftwaffe ever succeed in putting any fighter command base permanently out of action?
The only case you get that is Manston, which is on the tip of Kent. It's not far from the Luftwaffe Airfields. That is knocked out. Otherwise, no. The approach by the Luftwaffe is very haphazard. It's very disjointed. And if there was a concerted effort against the RDF stations, there was a concerted effort against the airfields, it could have been very interesting. It could have really, but they're very, as I say, you know, they'll bomb Biggin Hill one day and then give it 5 days before they bomb it again. It's not concentrated, and that is a major fault of the Luftwaffe when it comes to their offensive plans. I've answered it. Yeah, it's just Manston, essentially. I've waffled.
No, it's fantastic. And what a relevant point as well. And Neil's actually built on that question and mentioning were the Luftwaffe, were they equipped for the job?
No.
Do you not, what do you think?
No.
James Holland seems to maintain that fighter command were never near to losing. So were the Luftwaffe equipped? Was it decision in tactics? What do you think?
Massive questions there. Luftwaffe was not built for this sort of attack. Well, it was successful in France. You know, the medium range bombers, the Stukas, etc. They work when it comes to the initial blitzkrieg, etc. But when it comes to a siege, but saying that, the RAF isn't really built for strategic bombing at this stage. You know, it's only when it develops the Halifax and the Lancaster that it's able to take this forward. And the German Air Force Luftwaffe is miles away from this. In terms of the RAF ever losing, it's difficult. I mean, I generally agree with James Holland on that factor, but a lot of that has to come down with the haphazardness of the Luftwaffe effort. I think if it had realized the importance of RDF, it had realized the sense of the importance of the Dowding system, etc., it could have been a very, very different story. But again, it wasn't, and that's not at the detriment to the RAF and the incredible effort that they did, you know, in defending Britain. Yeah, I think you can be dangerous and go, oh, it was all settled and there was no chance, and actually that really underplays an incredible story that was very, very real at the time. Yeah,
absolutely. I think there's some fascinating, and I think the what if, those theoretical what if questions, military historians love a what if question.
They're rabbit holes though, aren't they? You go into them and it's just like
they do, but I think it builds a greater strategic knowledge and operational knowledge, and it just enables us to sort of be prepared for the complex global future operating environment where the battle space is so 3-4 dimensional, and all these new technologies that are bringing some really complex battle systems into place. But I've actually got a question, James, and growing up with my dad in the Royal Air Force, Battle of Britain was very much a part of our family and our lifestyle. I remember celebrating Battle of Britain Day. But for me, it was only synonymous really with the fighter pilots. It was the fighter pilots and Spitfires and Hurricanes going up and having these amazing aerial combats and fantastic. But you mentioned about Bomber Command and Coastal Command, and I think that's a really interesting narrative that, interestingly, I didn't sort of feel was a natural part of the Battle of Britain. So why do you think they've been sort of forgotten and they're not as prominent?
There's kind of a couple of things to this. At the time, they are very much, you know, spoken about. This is the Royal Air Force. This is about hitting back. This is about air superiority, which includes the bombers. what you need to consider is what happens later on in the war when you do have these moral questions. You do have the firebombing of Hamburg, you do have Dresden, and that builds a shadow, or casts a shadow over the events of 1940, which the Bomber Command in 1940 is a world away from 43, 44, 45. It's just, in terms of aircraft, in terms of size, in terms of tech, you can't really compare. I think as well, perhaps there was a little bit of appealing to other nations. So America comes into it, look at us defending. We don't want to be seen as a major aggressor, etc., etc. I think that perhaps that plays a part in it. And yeah, it is. I mean, you look at the bare bones of this, really. There's much more allure and romance over a fighter pilot than a bomber pilot. Bomber pilot, for a start,
Absolutely.
or bomber aircrew, flies this horrible, ugly, giant thing that's very slow. Fighter pilots are flying the absolute cutting edge aircraft of the day. They're dashing, they fly at high speed and their devil may care attitude and all this sort of thing. And the mentality of a fighter pilot, which is very apparent when it comes to recruitment, etc. Very different to a bomber pilot or a bomber crew. Bomber crew is, not to say that fighter pilots were devil may care, but it's that sense of a flamboyancy, that is attached to the idea of fighter pilots as opposed to bomber crews, which I think is a factor as well. And I mean, fighter pilots, they're there to defend cities, to defend women and children, and bomber crews drop bombs on women and children, which again, I think is another factor that comes into that overall memory. So there's a lot going on, but Bomber Command were very, very important and very much touted during the battle and afterwards. And they were included. So there was a roll of honor that was published that's in Westminster Abbey still, of aircrew in the Battle of Britain, and it includes Bomber and Coastal Command. And I think Coastal Command have just been kind of tagged along with Bomber Command in the narrative, which is terrible, really. But yeah.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you so much for that. I'd just like to ask a final question, and if anyone else would like to help me answer this, or help James answer this question as well, please pop it in the chat. But what is your favourite fighter? Because I certainly know which one mine is. So I'm wondering, other people who are watching, what's your favourite? Does everyone go for the Spitfire? What do we think of the BF 109? What do we think? Because for me personally, the workhorse of the Battle of Britain is the Hurricane.
Totally.
And that's my favorite fighter, and I feel like that was the best fighter.
Yeah, I'll stick to Battle of Britain because there are some incredible aircraft in the Second World War. I mean, yeah, the on paper you look at the Messerschmitt 109. I think I mentioned it in the talk. It's got more punch. It's got the cannons. It's fast. Pretty ugly though, really. I don't know. I mean, sorry, people who think it looks good, but I think it's a bit jagged and a bit. Spitfire is absolutely glorious. It looks like it should be in the air flying. And the fact that it's got the allure of coming out of the seaplanes and the Schneider Trophy in the races, that adds something to it. And Reginald Mitchell, the story that goes behind it as well. And you have the propaganda with the film The First of the Few, which massively romanticizes the Spitfire and the development. I'm going to agree. I think the Hurricane. I think it's got a stable gun platform. It's easy, just for the Battle of Britain. It's got a stable gun platform, easy to repair, easy to look after, and very favourable with people who flew them.
Oh, absolutely. But I think it's that it turns tighter than a Spitfire. And in a dogfight, that's what you need. I think the Spitfire's a beautiful plane. Those elliptical wings. Oh, I was absolutely captivated as a child.
It's stunning, and the sound as well. It's just, isn't it gorgeous? But yeah, I will put my cap down and say the Hurricane for the Battle of Britain. But I think if we go wider, I think the P-51 Mustang is an incredible aircraft as well. I think that's.
Oh yes, that has been mentioned in the chat. Spitfire P-51. So a couple of people have mentioned that. But I think we are coming to an end. So I think one more question, and I think it's about the Battle of Britain film. How do you think the film itself has helped sort of Britain's cultural memory to think of the Battle of Britain. What do you think of the film? Do you think it's an honest rendition? Do you think there are some bits that we can definitely discuss, i.e. doorbells on doors that definitely shouldn't be there? But I'm sure several people watching this talk probably would have seen that film as well. But what do you think of the film? Because it's a film I've grown up with and a film that I really do love. But the more I research and the more I've learned about history, the more I found just little things that I sort of pick up.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fabulous film. It's what got me into history. Yeah, it's not perfect, but name me a film that is. I think the effort that went into it, especially when, the attention to detail, doorbells aside, and dodgy 60s haircuts aside, making the various marks of Spitfire and tracking these aircraft all over the world. It's an all-star cast, an incredible cast. You've got young Michael Caine, you've got Christopher Plummer, you're just absolutely it's just an all-star cast. How's it played on the memory? I mean, there are things that I really love about it. The fact that it includes the Polish pilots. I think there's some wonderful scenes there that are comic, but actually highlight, hey, look, the Air Force was built up of these various nations. And I love the fact that at the end, you get the roll of honor with the lists of the various countries. So you have Canada, you have New Zealand, you have all of these, countries highlighted, which is an important factor with the Battle of Britain. There are a few mistakes, but I'm not going to lie, it's probably my favorite war film.
Brilliant. I think that's an excellent choice. I really do think that's an excellent choice. So on that note, if there's no further questions, I'd just like to say thank you so much, James. It was a wonderful talk, so informative. And there's already been a couple of people in the chat saying that it's been a great presentation and they are now going to have a look at Coastal Command and Bomber Command, do a bit more research.
It's fascinating. The story is so much more nuanced and interesting when you look into it. It's an interesting story to begin with, but yeah, when you look at it further. But shout out to Combined Military Services Museum. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to ramble on about the Battle of Britain. It is an incredible museum. There's some incredible artifacts there from all over history, including the Battle of Britain, which I have tried to highlight some of them, but they all have a story. So yeah, I just want to chip in just to say awesome museum.
No, thank you so much. And if anyone does want to come to the museum, you can find us very easily, combinedmilitaryservicesmuseum.com. Come and have a look. We have got some really amazing stories, some amazing articles. And I mean, just standing next to Bomber Harris's uniform really shows you how tall that man really was. So please do check out our website. Check out if you're near and want to come visit us, please do. But thank you so much, James. We really appreciate it. And please have a look next time for our next Tea Time talk, which will be at the end of next month. Subject to be confirmed at the moment, but really looking forward to really driving these talks. I think they're fascinating. I think it's something that we can absolutely capture these wonderful stories in our museum. So thank you very much, James, and thank you everyone who attended. I hope you really enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.